Let's discuss this topic in more detail with our guest, Yevhen Kostorizov, analyst at the Ukrainian Foreign Policy Council. He is already with us live, please. Hello?
Yes, hello, nice to meet you.
Welcome to our broadcast, Yevhen. Let's discuss the latest news. We can see that events are developing quite dynamically. By the way, there's also a very interesting aspect. How propagandists, who somehow managed to film videos both on the beach and in the city, then it turns out, of course, that these videos were slightly edited, but they claim that everything is calm and peaceful. And it really reeks of that, sort of Russian propaganda machine, which we've been witnessing here in Ukraine in full force since 2022 in public forums. But that's not what we're talking about now. There are many different sources of information and disinformation that we read and see. But there are also statements like, for example, Iran wants to start negotiations with the US to end the war, but it's already too late for that. This was reported by Donald Trump on the social network Truth Social. What do you think Iran really wants right now? And what situation is the country in? What is the situation now?
First and foremost, Iran wants, of course, for the hostilities to stop without losing even more of its own infrastructure, without losing even more of its own military assets, and possibly without suffering the kind of serious damage that has already been inflicted on its nuclear program. Well, again, we don't have access to classified information that would actually state, for example, how many nuclear facilities in Iran have been destroyed and how difficult they are to restore. But of course, Iran is interested in having all this come to an end. I think no one in their right mind believes that this war is beneficial to Iran right now. And of course, it's hard to say that Iran has become a victim of this war, because for many years it has carried out very provocative actions, and by no means has it been a country that meets high standards of freedom and democracy. But again, the fact remains, the United States carried out the first attack. As for whether negotiations are possible, well, I think Donald Trump put it very succinctly. No, at this stage they are impossible, since the operation is still ongoing. The US believes that if they move to negotiations now, then all the preparations, to put it bluntly, would have been for nothing. That is, when there is an opportunity to completely eliminate the threat to the security of the United States, and this threat is, first and foremost, the missile program and the possible nuclear program, then why stop halfway, especially considering, let's say, how previous negotiations with Iran were conducted by the US? They led nowhere. Iran adhered to the same tactics that the Russian Federation uses. They dragged out time, and in reality, these negotiations never led to anything that could satisfy the United States.
On the other hand, Evgeny, considering the current situation in the Middle East, how long can it drag on, given Trump's words, or rather not even Trump's, but Caroline Leavitt's, who was relaying all of Trump's talking points, that this military operation in Iran will continue until Iran's entire missile potential is exhausted? But how many missiles Iran has and what its potential is remains a mystery to everyone. Just as it is a mystery at what stage Iran is in developing nuclear weapons and nuclear missiles.
Well, I think by missile potential, they didn't mean a specific number of missiles, but rather the capacity to produce them. That is to say, there are, of course, missiles that can even be produced outside of Iran, for example, covertly on the territory of Lebanon, which is what Hezbollah and other pro-Iranian groups are engaged in. These missiles can literally be made in a garage. They're made from pipes. And of course, they can't reach the United States, and even reaching neighboring countries is difficult for them. I think that the Americans, of course, were talking about the advanced missile program, about the fact that Iran must be completely deprived of any engineering capabilities to be able to resume this program in the coming years. And indeed, until the relevant infrastructure capabilities are destroyed, the US is most likely not going to be willing to stop, at least, its air operations. There is also a discussion about whether a ground operation is possible. Not long ago, President Trump was asked about this. He said maybe yes, maybe no. Well, that's his classic answer. But here, it's worth emphasizing one more thing regarding delays. Most countries that start wars, and we know this from the example of the Russian Federation, among others, may plan for one duration of hostilities, but end up with something completely different. And I think that in this case, the United States could very well find itself in a bind. That is, if they want this operation to last a few weeks, and such statements have been made, it could very well, unfortunately for them, last much longer. In the event that, for example, Iran turns out to be or proves to be better prepared, at least in terms of infrastructure for these hostilities, and if, for instance, the actions of the United States instead unite within Iran, not the entire population, of course, but a certain critical segment of it, We need to understand that far from all of the Iranian people are freedom fighters who take to the streets in protest. There are many such people, and we are only too willing to help them. And the Americans apparently are also not opposed to helping them. But a very large portion of Iran's population still considers America to be the main enemy, and these strikes have only served to confirm their beliefs. That's why it's very hard to say whether this will drag on or not. But if it does drag on, the consequences for Trump will be, to put it mildly, negative. This will also have an impact on the elections that are supposed to take place in November of this year. I mean, the parliamentary elections in the United States. Clearly, no president who has entered into a prolonged war, if this war becomes drawn out, has ever enjoyed high approval ratings in such elections. Well, I mean, his party, since the president himself, of course, does not run in the parliamentary elections, and so this is quite a risky undertaking. I think that's precisely why we didn't see the start of these hostilities for such a long time. Trump was weighing all the pros and cons. Now, everything will depend on several variables that, unfortunately, we do not know at this point.
We see that there are statements from the White House indicating that there will not be a quick resolution to the Iranian issue. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that the most devastating strikes against Iran are still ahead. Speaking on Fox News, he emphasized that the operation will continue until the set objectives are achieved. According to him, Washington intends to complete the campaign it has started, but for now, it is difficult to predict how long this will take. Let's listen.
I'm not going to disclose the details of our tactical efforts, but the strongest strikes from the US military are still ahead. The next phase will be even more devastating for Iran than what we are seeing now. The operation will continue until the Pentagon achieves its objectives, and Washington's goals are the destruction of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities and its ability to produce them, as well as the elimination of the threat their fleet poses to global shipping. The world will be a safer place when we finish this operation.
All these events are being closely watched in Beijing. And China, as usual, is trying to be cautious in its statements, but they are sending certain signals. How do you interpret them?
Well, the most important signal from Beijing regarding the immediate cessation, at least of military actions at sea, is connected to the fact that the Chinese economy is now about to experience maybe not a very prolonged, but still a crisis as a result of the fact that energy resources, especially gas supplied from the monarchies of the Persian Gulf, are fundamentally important for the Chinese economy. Moreover, I can't tell you exactly how much, but it seems to me that a significant portion of the oil supplied to China is also directly of Iranian origin. So the issue isn't even that Iran has blocked exports to other countries. There is still the possibility to export, of course, not such large volumes, but also from other ports that are not located in the combat zone. But the issue is that exporting Iranian oil itself under conditions of military conflict on Iranian territory is almost impossible. This is, the kind of problem we faced in 2022 when we couldn't properly export our agricultural products by sea. And here oil is an even more, let's say, complicated product to transport. That's why the first and most important signals from China are truly about stopping military actions at sea. And this is something the US, I'm sure, will not want to ensure, will not be able to ensure, and under no circumstances will do. At least not until Iran itself stops these military actions at sea, most likely by ceasing the existence of its own fleet. This is what the United States is aiming for. And the second signal that China is sending, it seems to me, is a signal directly to the United States that, roughly speaking, we will not respond to you right now, because indeed that would be a very, very big escalation that China is not ready for. But in the future, we could very well do something similar. Of course, a direct military operation is not meant here, but rather interference in the affairs of a particular country, possibly in the American region. And since what has just happened with Iran is a very big problem for both Russia and China, they are, of course, especially Russia, trying to publicly distance themselves from it. We know the statements from both the Kremlin and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation saying that, well, we have no military obligations to Iran. All of this is, of course, very interesting, but the fact remains the fact. Both Iran, Russia, and China were and remain, at least up to this point, components of the so-called axis of evil, which currently exists and which, among other things, is interested in the continuation of hostilities here in Ukraine. That is why weakening this axis will undoubtedly be a very good and very correct decision. Again, the only problem we are facing right now is the rise in oil prices. But again, this seems to me to be a rather temporary phenomenon. Even if the current military hostilities continue to drag on for a while, prices could still fall simply because alternative methods and routes to export oil will eventually be found.
And to what extent here? We literally have a minute, Evgeny. Just to clarify, is Russia winning or losing here? I mean, on the topic of global oil price fluctuations, global, I emphasize.
The short answer is this: Russia may be able to support its economy in a somewhat better and more stable state for a few more months than it could have if these military hostilities had not occurred. However, strategically, this changes nothing for Russia. That is, we can't say this is a lifeline for Putin and that he will be able to continue military actions against Ukraine for many, many months thanks to these hostilities. This is a temporary, let's say, difficulty for our side and a temporary improvement for Russia, strictly temporary.
Thank you
for finding the time to join us on air. Yevhen Kostorizov, analyst at the Ukrainian Prism Foreign Policy Council, was with us live. All